Did you know that some of the biggest turning points in human history weren't decided on battlefields or in solemn council chambers, but in the hushed intimacy of a handwritten note? What if the destiny of kingdoms, the power of churches, and the very shape of nations hung precariously on a few heartfelt lines, scrawled in secret? Get ready to uncover the medieval secrets roughly spanning from the 11th to the early 16th centuries, where passion met power and love rewrote the course of history. Number 1. The letters between Richard II and Anne of Bohemia. The year is the late 14th century. England is a land still grappling with the lingering shadows of the Black Death, a brutal pandemic that reshaped society. A young king, Richard II, sits on the throne, a monarch still finding his footing after the terrifying Peasants' Revolt of 1381, which he personally helped quell with remarkable bravery for his age. He is a sensitive, artistic soul, in a warrior's world surrounded by ambitious uncles, and a realm yearning for stability, but constantly pulled into conflict with France. The air of the court is thick with political intrigue, but at its heart there is a queen, Anne of Bohemia, whose gentle influence and tragic passing would send ripples through the very foundations of the English crown. For generations to come, Richard II was born into a tumultuous world, the son of the Black Prince, a legendary warrior, and Joan of Kent, a woman of significant charm and political acumen. When he became king at just 10 years old, the weight of the crown was immense. He was handsome, slender, with a tendency towards vanity, but also possessed a keen intellect and a deep appreciation for the arts and literature. He yearned for peace and order, a stark contrast to the warlike temperament of many of his Plantagenet ancestors. However, he also possessed a growing streak of autocracy, a desire to rule without the constant interference of his powerful noblemen. His early years were marked by the struggle to assert his authority against formidable figures like his uncle John of Gaunt, Duke of Lancaster. Anne of Bohemia arrived in England in 1382. She was the daughter of Charles IV, Holy Roman Emperor and King of Bohemia, and the sister of the future Emperor Wenceslaus IV. Her marriage to Richard was a political match, brokered to secure an alliance with the Holy Roman Empire against France during the 100 Years' War. She was not considered a great beauty by contemporary standards, and the dowry was relatively small, drawing some criticism from English nobles. However, Anne was known for her kindness, piety, and intelligence. She was well educated and brought with her a passion for learning and a gentle, diplomatic nature that quickly endeared her to many in England. She was often seen as a voice of moderation and peace in a volatile court. From the moment they met, a deep and genuine affection blossomed between Richard and Anne. What began as a strategic alliance evolved into a truly loving partnership, something quite rare for royal marriages. Of the era, chroniclers describe a king utterly devoted to his queen, listening to her counsel and cherishing her companionship. While no specific romantic love letters from Richard to Anne are widely known to have survived, the depth of their bond is evident in the historical accounts of their time. Together, their shared love for literature, for a refined, courtly life, and for moments of quiet intimacy, all suggest a constant personal communication between them that transcended the political. Anne's constant advocacy for mercy and forgiveness, particularly for those involved in the Peasants' Revolt, earned her the nickname Good Queen Anne. Her presence at court was a source of stability, a gentle hand guiding a king prone to emotional swings. The profound impact of their bond, rooted in these unspoken communications, and the shared life they built, became tragically clear with Anne's sudden death. In June 1394, Anne of Bohemia succumbed to the plague at Sheen Palace near London. She was only 28 years old. The king's reaction was one of overwhelming, unbridled grief. Chroniclers describe Richard falling into a deep despair, his mind reportedly unhinged by the loss. In a fit of rage and sorrow, he ordered the destruction of Sheen Palace, the very place where his beloved queen had drawn her last breath. He could not bear to look upon the place where their happiness had ended. His anguish was palpable, and it fundamentally altered his personality and his approach to governance. The immediate ripple effect of Anne's death was a profound shift in Richard's character and his rule. The gentle, sometimes indecisive king vanished, replaced by an increasingly autocratic, paranoid, and vengeful monarch. He became more isolated, less willing to tolerate dissent or challenge to his authority. His grief seemed to harden him, making him less amenable to counsel and more prone to arbitrary decisions. He became obsessed with projecting absolute power, leading to extravagant displays of wealth and a growing tyranny that alienated many of his powerful nobles, including his own family. The moderating influence of Anne was gone, and Richard seemed to lose his moral compass, allowing his more destructive tendencies to take over. The unfolding consequences were catastrophic for Richard II and for the Plantagenet dynasty. In the years following Anne's death, Richard's rule became increasingly oppressive. He exiled prominent noblemen, including Henry Bolingbroke, the son of John of Gaunt, a decision that proved to be his undoing. Bolingbroke, stripped of his inheritance and banished, returned to England in 1399, ostensibly to reclaim his rightful lands, but quickly gained widespread, increasingly tyrannical reign. Richard, weakened by grief and poor judgment, was unprepared for this challenge. He was captured, forced to abdicate his throne, and eventually died in captivity, likely murdered. This unprecedented deposition of a king, a direct result of Richard's self-destructive path, initiated by Anne's passing, ended the main line of the Plantagenet dynasty. Crown passed to Henry Bolingbroke, who became Henry IV, establishing the Lancastrian dynasty. This usurpation, however, created a fundamental instability in the English succession, providing a crucial justification for the Yorkist claims decades later and directly setting the stage for the devastating Wars of the Roses. The profound love between Richard and Anne, and the tragic loss of that love, indirectly ignited a century of civil conflict that reshaped England forever. Number 2. The secret communications of Elizabeth Woodville and Edward IV. The mid-15th century in England was a time of brutal, relentless civil war, known as the Wars of the Roses. Two great houses, Lancaster and York, locked in a bloody struggle for the crown, tore the country apart. The year is 1464, and the Yorkist king, Edward IV, has recently claimed the throne. After a series of decisive victories, he is young, dashing, and immensely popular. A Mahdic warrior who had led his forces to triumph. His authority, however, is still fragile, and his powerful allies, particularly the Earl of Warwick, known as the Kingmaker, wield significant influence, expecting their counsel to be followed in all matters of state, especially the king's marriage. Edward IV, the eldest son of Richard, Duke of York, was a towering figure, both literally and figuratively. He stood over 6 feet tall, handsome and charming, with a natural charisma that captivated those around him. A formidable military commander, he had proven his ability to win battles and seize power. Yet for all his martial prowess, Edward was also known for his romantic conquests. He was prone to infatuation and, unlike many kings of his era, sometimes allowed his personal desires to override political expediency. He was eager to consolidate his power and establish a secure dynasty, but his heart sometimes led him down unexpected paths. Elizabeth Woodville was a figure of quiet determination and stunning beauty. Born into a lesser noble family, she was the daughter of Richard Woodville, Baron Rivers, and Jacquetta of Luxembourg, a woman of much higher aristocratic connections. Elizabeth was a widow, her first husband, Sir John Grey of Groby, a Lancastrian, having died fighting for the opposing side at the Second Battle of St. Albans. This left her with 2 young sons and a desperate need to reclaim her late husband's lands, which had been forfeited to the crown. She was known for her exceptional looks with long golden hair and captivating blue eyes, and her composure even in challenging circumstances. The story of their meeting is shrouded in romantic legend, but is deeply rooted in historical fact. Elizabeth, a determined widow, sought out King Edward to petition for the return of her late husband's confiscated estates. Accounts suggest that Edward was immediately captivated by her beauty and spirit. What followed was a courtship unlike any other for a king. Edward, known for his numerous mistresses, initially sought to make Elizabeth one of them. However, Elizabeth steadfastly refused, reportedly stating that she was too good to be a concubine to the king and not good enough to be his queen. This refusal, coupled with her unwavering virtue, only intensified Edward's passion. Their secret communications, likely through discreet notes and hushed meetings, cultivated an intense connection. The very fact of their secret courtship, defying all political advice and precedent, was itself a profound declaration of love and commitment, a silent love letter exchanged between two determined individuals. On May 1st, 1464, in a quiet, secret ceremony at Grafton Regis, the Woodville family home, Edward IV and Elizabeth Woodville were married. The news was kept hidden for months, a testament to the sensitive nature of their union. This was not a politically arranged marriage to a foreign princess, which was expected of a king, but a clandestine union driven by personal passion. The immediate ripple effect of this secret marriage was explosive. When the news finally broke, it sent shockwaves through the English court and beyond. The most powerful man in England, Richard Neville, the Earl of Warwick, the kingmaker, was absolutely furious. Warwick had been in France painstakingly negotiating a marriage alliance for Edward with a French Princess Bona of Savoy. To secure a crucial peace treaty, Edward's secret marriage not only made a mockery of Warwick's efforts, but also deeply insulted the powerful French court. More importantly, it showed a blatant disregard for Warwick's political counsel and power. The unfolding consequences of this audacious act were immense and plunged England back into the chaos of civil war. Warwick, feeling deeply humiliated and undermined, slowly began to turn against King Edward. He had effectively put Edward on the throne, and he expected the king to be pliable. Edward's independent action with Elizabeth was a direct challenge to Warwick's authority. Warwick allied himself with Edward's disgruntled brother, George, Duke of Clarence, and later openly switched his allegiance back to the Lancastrian cause, even going so far as to restore the deposed King Henry VI to the throne for a brief period. This massive defection by the most powerful nobleman in England led to a renewal of intense hostilities in the Wars of the Roses. Edward was briefly deposed, forced to flee England, and had to fight desperately to reclaim his crown. The Woodville family, Elizabeth's kin, were showered with royal favor and wealth, rapidly rising to positions of power and influence. This rapid ascent of a relatively minor noble family further stoked resentment among the established aristocracy, exacerbating existing tensions within the realm. The instability created by Edward's choice and the resulting power struggles, including the mysterious fate of the princes in the Tower after Edward's death, directly paved the way for Henry Tudor's unveiled, ending the Plantagenet dynasty and ushering in the Tudor era. A love story born in secrecy had profound and lasting consequences for the English crown. Number 3. The passionate appeals of Catherine of Siena to Pope Gregory XI. The late 14th century was a tumultuous time for the Christian Church. For nearly 70 years, the papacy, the spiritual heart of Western Christendom, had been resident not in Rome, its traditional seat, but in Avignon. This long absence, often referred to as the Babylonian captivity, had deeply tarnished the Church's reputation. It was widely perceived as corrupt, overly influenced by the French monarchy, and detached from its spiritual mission. Many longed for the Pope to return to Rome, to restore the dignity and independence of the Holy See. But indecision, political maneuvering, and fear kept the popes in Avignon, seemingly trapped by circumstances. In this climate of spiritual unease, a remarkable figure emerged, Catherine of Siena. Born in 1347, she was the 23rd of 25 children to a wool dyer in Siena, Italy. Illiterate for much of her life, she was a mystic with profound spiritual experiences from a young age. Despite her humble origins and lack of formal education, Catherine possessed an extraordinary intellect, an iron will, and a captivating personality. She was deeply devoted to God and to the Church, seeing herself as a servant of Christ, compelled to speak truth to power. She gathered a large following, including priests, nuns, and laypeople who were drawn to her fervent piety and her calls for reform. Pope Gregory XI, born Pierre Roger de Beaufort, was the last of the Avignon popes. He was a man of considerable piety and learning, but also known for his indecisiveness and his susceptibility to the political pressures of the French court and the strong resistance of his cardinals. He understood the spiritual arguments for returning to Rome, but he also feared the chaos and dangers of Italy, a land rife with political factions and rebellious city-states. He was a pope, burdened by the weight of his office, caught between his spiritual duties and the powerful political realities of his time. Catherine's relationship with Gregory XI was not one of romantic love, but one of intense, passionate, spiritual devotion, and a fierce, unyielding commitment to the Church she adored. She believed it was her God-given mission to convince the Pope to return to Rome. Her love letters to him were not declarations of earthly affection, but fervent, sometimes brutally direct, appeals to his conscience and his spiritual authority. She addressed him as "Sweet Babbo," "Sweet Father," but also admonished him like a child. She wrote hundreds of letters, many of them dictated to scribes, filled with powerful imagery and uncompromising demands for action. She urged him, almost commanded him, to abandon Avignon, to embrace his role as the true shepherd of the Church, to reform the clergy, and to initiate a new crusade. She spoke of the shame and scandal of the Church's long absence from its true seat, and the deep love she felt for the suffering people of God. Her words were sharp, direct, and imbued with an authority that seemed to come from a higher power. The immediate ripple effect of Catherine's unrelenting appeals was a profound internal struggle for Pope Gregory XI. He received her letters sometimes from Catherine herself, who traveled to Avignon in 1376 to meet him face to face. Her passionate arguments, her spiritual fervor, and her unwavering conviction deeply impressed him, unsettling his indecision. Despite the fierce opposition from the French king, most of his cardinals and his own family, who all urged him to remain in Avignon for their own political and personal interests, Gregory felt compelled by Catherine's spiritual arguments. He made the monumental decision to leave Avignon and return the papacy to Rome. This was an act of extraordinary courage for a pope in his position, directly influenced by the spiritual persuasion of an uneducated laywoman. The unfolding consequences of this momentous decision were far-reaching and ironically led to further upheaval before eventual reform. Pope Gregory XI finally returned to Rome in January 1377, ending the 70-year Avignon papacy. This single act, heavily influenced by Catherine's passionate love letters to the Church, was intended to restore unity and dignity to the papacy. However, Gregory XI died shortly after his return. The subsequent papal election, held under intense pressure from the Roman populace demanding an Italian pope, led to the election of Urban VI. His perceived tyrannical behavior immediately alienated the French cardinals, who declared his election invalid and elected their own pope, Clement VII, who returned to Avignon. This catastrophic division inaugurated the Western Schism, a period of nearly 40 years where 2, and later 3, popes simultaneously claimed legitimacy, tearing the Church apart and profoundly shaking the faith of millions. While Catherine had successfully moved the papacy back to Rome, her spiritual vision of a unified and reformed Church was immediately challenged by a crisis of unprecedented scale. Yet her courageous insistence on papal return laid the groundwork for eventual Church reform movements and demonstrated the remarkable power of individual conviction, born of spiritual love, to challenge the highest political and religious authorities. Number 4. The inspiring influence of Agnes Sorel on Charles VII of France. The mid-15th century in France was a landscape scarred by the 100 Years' War. England still occupied significant portions of French territory, including the important city of Paris. Charles VII, the rightful king of France, was often dismissed as the King of Bourg, his court confined to the Loire Valley, while the English held sway over much of his kingdom. Though Joan of Arc had inspired a brief resurgence and seen him crowned at Rheims, her influence had faded, and the war seemed to drag on endlessly. The king himself was often seen as indecisive, melancholic, and lacking the drive to fully expel the English and reclaim his inheritance. Charles VII was a complex figure. As a young man, he had endured immense personal tragedy and political humiliation, including the murder of his father and the Treaty of Troyes, which disinherited him in favor of the English king. This had left him cautious, withdrawn, and prone to inaction. Despite being the legitimate monarch, he struggled to assert his authority and unite the fractured French nobility. He was deeply intelligent, but often lacked the personal fortitude and strategic vision to lead his country to victory. His court was a mix of brilliant advisors and self-serving factions, all vying for his attention. Agnes Sorel, known as Dame de Beauté, Lady of Beauty, entered Charles VII's life around 1443 and quickly became his chief mistress. Born into minor nobility, she was exceptionally beautiful, intelligent, and famously fashionable. Unlike previous royal mistresses, who often remained in the shadows, Agnes carved out a prominent and public role at court. She was not just a king's lover. She was a woman of strong will, sharp wit, and considerable influence. She reportedly held a strong fascination for Charles, becoming his confidant and a powerful presence by his side. While no direct surviving love letters between Agnes and Charles are widely known, the nature of their relationship and the historical accounts of her profound impact serve as a testament to their deep connection. Their passion was a constant, unspoken message between them, driving their interactions and shaping the king's decisions. Agnes was unique in her open display of her status and her involvement in courtly affairs. Chroniclers and later historians suggest that Agnes was far more than a mere ornament. She was a powerful catalyst for Charles's personal and political transformation. She reportedly urged him to action, to reclaim his kingdom, and to shake off his melancholy and indecision. The very fact of her influence was a form of communication, a testament to her ability to inspire and motivate the monarch. She was said to be the first mistress to receive the title Dame, and her lavish lifestyle and public presence were a statement of the king's devotion and her own power. The immediate ripple effect of Agnes Sorel's influence was a palpable shift in Charles VII's leadership. Inspired and emboldened by her presence and her urgings, the king began to show a renewed determination to prosecute the war against the English. He shed his lethargy and began to take a more active role in military and administrative matters. Contemporaries noted a marked change in his demeanor from a passive figure to a more assertive and ambitious monarch. Agnes's influence extended to encouraging reforms within the French military and government, advocating for a more efficient and centralized system to fund and command the war effort. Her direct and indirect communications, through persuasion and inspiration, began to reshape the king's approach to ruling. The unfolding consequences of this transformation were nothing short of monumental for France. Charles VII, spurred by Agnes Sorel, began to implement the military and financial reforms necessary to create a professional standing army. He appointed capable commanders and pursued a more aggressive strategy against the English. This renewed effort culminated in a series of decisive French victories, including the Battle of Castillon in 1453, which effectively ended the 100 Years' War. The English were largely expelled from France, retaining only the port of Calais. Agnes Sorel is often credited by historians with playing a crucial role in rekindling Charles's ambition and seeing the war through to its successful conclusion. Her presence and influence helped transform Charles VII from the King of Boors into Charles the Victorious. This dramatic turnaround secured France's independence and laid the groundwork for a stronger, more unified French monarchy. Personal bond between a king and his mistress, communicated through passion and unwavering conviction, played a vital role in shaping the destiny of a nation, bringing a bitter century-long conflict to an end. Number 5. The coordinated plot between Isabella of France and Roger Mortimer. The early 14th century in England was a turbulent period marked by a weak and unpopular king, Edward II, and a powerful, often rebellious baronage. Edward II, unlike his formidable father Edward I, was more interested in personal favorites than in the hard work of governance. His infatuation with Piers Gaveston, and later with Hugh Despenser, alienated his powerful nobles, and crucially, his own queen. England was a kingdom simmering with discontent, and cross-channel relations with France were Edward's queen. Edward II was a king deeply ill-suited to his role. He lacked his father's martial prowess and administrative skill. Instead, he favored the company of men like Piers Gaveston and Hugh Despenser, showering them with titles, wealth, and power, much to the fury of the established nobility. He was often perceived as frivolous, indecisive, and openly contemptuous of his queen and his royal duties. His personal life was also a source of scandal, particularly his close, arguably romantic relationships with his male favorites, which further alienated his wife and the court. Isabella of France was a formidable woman, born into the powerful Capetian dynasty of France, the daughter of King Philip IV, the Fair. She was beautiful, intelligent, and proud, with a strong sense of her royal dignity. Married to Edward II at the age of 12, she initially tried to play the role of a dutiful queen. However, she was increasingly sidelined and humiliated by Edward's blatant favoritism towards Despenser, who reportedly seized her lands and even her jewels. Her frustration grew into open hostility, and her pride as a French princess was deeply wounded. Roger Mortimer was a powerful English baron, a marcher lord from the Welsh Marches, a region known for its fierce independent lords. He was ambitious, monarchic, and a natural leader. He had been a prominent opponent of Edward II and the Despensers, leading to his imprisonment in the Tower of London, and later, his escape in exile in France. It was in France in 1325 that his path irrevocably crossed with Queen Isabella's. Isabella had traveled to France ostensibly to negotiate a peace treaty with her brother, King Charles IV. But her true purpose was to escape her husband's oppressive court and rally support against the Despensers. There, a passionate and politically explosive affair ignited between the queen and the exiled baron. Their relationship, fueled by shared hatred for Edward II and mutual ambition, transformed into a powerful, illicit love that would reshape the English monarchy. Their coordination of a political coup, an invasion, would have required extensive secret communication, a flow of love letters disguised as political dispatches, charting their conspiracy and maintaining their dangerous alliance. These communications, while not necessarily surviving as explicit romantic letters, underpin their powerful personal and political bond. The immediate ripple effect of this burgeoning alliance and the clandestine communications between Isabella and Mortimer was the formation of a formidable opposition force in France. They gathered disgruntled English exiles and secured support from elements within the French court, particularly Isabella's brother, King Charles IV. Their communications outlined a plan, an invasion of England to overthrow the Despensers, and implicitly, Edward II himself. They used propaganda to paint Edward as an incompetent and tyrannical ruler, while portraying Isabella as a wronged queen seeking justice for her son, the future Edward III. Their efforts culminated in their invasion of England in September 1326, landing with a relatively small force but quickly gaining overwhelming support from the English nobility and populace, who were fed up with Edward II's disastrous rule. The unfolding consequences of Isabella and Mortimer's combined efforts were immediate and brutal. Changing the course of English kingship, their invasion met almost no resistance. Edward II, deserted by his court, was captured and forced to abdicate his throne in favor of his young son, Edward III. This was the first time in English history that a reigning monarch had been deposed by his own wife and her lover. Edward II was then brutally murdered in Berkeley Castle, a shocking act that sent shivers through medieval Europe. Isabella and Mortimer effectively ruled England as regents for the young Edward III. Their power, however, was born of violence and maintained through ruthlessness. Mortimer, in particular, grew arrogant and acquisitive, alienating many of the nobles who had initially supported him. His overreach led to his own downfall. In 1330, a young Edward III, no longer willing to be a puppet king, staged a coup against Mortimer, arresting him and eventually executing him for treason. Isabella was stripped of her political power and confined to a life of quiet luxury. While their reign was short-lived, the precedent of a deposed and murdered king had a profound and lasting impact on the concept of royal authority in England, setting a dangerous precedent for future monarchs and contributing to the political instability. Number 6. The scrawled promises of Henry VIII to Anne Boleyn. The early 16th century in England was a period of immense change, poised on the brink of religious and political upheaval. Henry VIII, a monarchic and powerful king, was deeply religious, but also utterly obsessed with securing a male heir to the English throne. His marriage to Catherine of Aragon had produced only a daughter, Mary, and the lack of a living male heir was a source of profound anxiety for Henry, who feared for the stability of his dynasty. Papal authority held supreme sway over the spiritual lives of Christians across Europe, and divorce, especially for a king, was a complex matter requiring Rome's blessing. Henry VIII was a towering figure both physically and politically. In his youth, he was athletic, handsome, and highly intelligent, a true Renaissance prince. He was also deeply religious, initially a staunch defender of the Catholic faith, earning the title Defender of the Faith from the Pope. However, he was also incredibly headstrong, accustomed to getting his own way, and possessed a fierce belief in his divine right to rule. His desire for a male heir was paramount, fueled by historical precedents of succession, crises, and his own dynastic ambitions. This desire would ultimately drive him to defy the most powerful institution in Europe, the papacy. Anne Boleyn was a fascinating and pivotal figure. She was younger than Henry, intelligent, witty, fashionable, and well-educated, having spent time at the French court. She possessed a strong personality and a firm conviction in her religious beliefs, which leaned towards the new ideas of Protestant reform. Crucially, she was also determined not to become another of the king's numerous mistresses. She held out for marriage, a decision that would shake England to its core. Her charm and intelligence captivated Henry, who became utterly infatuated with her, seeing her as the key to both his dynastic future and his personal happiness. The love letters between Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn are among the most famous and historically significant royal correspondences. 17 of Henry's letters to Anne survive, mostly written in French, one in English. They are a treasure trove of his intense passion, his longing for her, and his desperate impatience for the annulment of his marriage to Catherine of Aragon. He declares his love, laments her absence, complains about the slow pace of the divorce proceedings, and promises to make her his queen. These letters are not just declarations of love. They are tangible evidence of the king's profound infatuation and his unwavering commitment to making Anne his wife, regardless of the political or religious consequence. Anne's own letters to Henry have not survived in the same volume, but her responses are often implied in Henry's replies, suggesting a calculated resistance to his advances. until she could secure the ultimate prize, the crown. The immediate ripple effect of these passionate letters and the deepening affair was a relentless campaign by Henry VIII to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon. Driven by his love for Anne and his desperate need for a male heir, Henry put immense pressure on the Pope, Clement VII, to grant the annulment. He argued that his marriage to Catherine, his brother's widow, was forbidden by biblical law. However, the Pope, under the influence of Catherine's nephew, the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, refused to grant the annulment. Henry's frustration, articulated in his letters to Anne, grew into a fierce determination to bypass papal authority altogether. In 1532, Anne became pregnant. Henry, now desperate, secretly married Anne in January 1533, making her pregnancy legitimate. In his eyes, this defiance of the Pope was a direct consequence of his obsession with Anne and his need for a legitimate heir. The unfolding consequences of this royal love affair were revolutionary for England, and beyond. Henry VIII, with the support of his new Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Cranmer, declared his marriage to Catherine invalid, and his marriage to Anne legitimate. This act directly led to the English. Henry, through a series of parliamentary acts, severed England's ties with the Roman Catholic Church, establishing the Church of England with himself as its supreme head. This was not initially a theological shift towards Protestantism for Henry, but rather a political move born of his desire for a divorce and a male heir. However, it unleashed a torrent of religious and political change across England. Monasteries were dissolved, their vast wealth seized by the crown, fundamentally reshaping the English economy and social structure. Those who resisted, like Sir Thomas More, were executed, demonstrating the king's ruthless new authority. The marriage to Anne, despite its tragic end for her, produced Princess Elizabeth, who would later become Queen Elizabeth, the first one of England's most powerful and successful monarchs, further solidifying the new church and establishing England as a Protestant nation. Passionate words scrawled in Henry's letters to Anne directly lit the fuse of the English Reformation, fundamentally altering the spiritual, political, and cultural landscape of England for centuries to come. Number 7. The tragic correspondence of Heloise and Abelard. The early 12th century in Paris was a crucible of intellectual ferment. The city was emerging as a center of learning, laying the foundations for what would become the great universities of Europe. Scholastic philosophy was flourishing, and brilliant minds debated theology, logic, and rhetoric with passionate intensity. Monasteries were centers of scholarship and spiritual life, and education, particularly for those destined for the church, was highly valued. But within this structured world, the raw power of human intellect and emotion could still break through with profound and often tragic consequences. Peter Abelard was one of the most brilliant and controversial thinkers of his age. Born in Brittany in 1079, he was a philosopher, theologian, and logician of immense talent, and a sharp, often arrogant wit. He attracted thousands of students from across Europe with his Medic teaching style and his willingness to challenge established doctrines. His intellect was undeniable, but his pride and self-confidence were equally profound, leading him into numerous disputes with ecclesiastical authorities and fellow scholars. He was a man who reveled in intellectual combat and the adoration of his followers. Héloïse d'Argentoul was an extraordinary woman for her time. Born around 1100, she was renowned for her exceptional intelligence and her mastery of Latin, Greek, and Hebrew. A level of education extremely rare for a woman in medieval Europe. She was taken in by her uncle Fulbert, a canon at Notre Dame Cathedral, who was immensely proud of her intellectual gifts and sought the best possible tutor for her. She was beautiful, curious, and possessed a keen mind that rivaled and perhaps even surpassed Abelard's in some areas. Her intellectual prowess and independent spirit would lead her into a tragic yet historically significant love affair. The relationship between Héloïse and Abelard began when Abelard was hired to tutor Héloïse in her uncle Fulbert's home. The teacher, then in his late 30s, and his brilliant young student, still a teenager, embarked on a passionate and secret love affair. Abelard himself later admitted he was driven by pride and lust. Their connection was intellectual as well as physical, a dangerous combination in a society bound by strict social and religious conventions. Heloise became pregnant, and they secretly married to legitimize their child, a son named Astrolabe. When their secret was inevitably discovered, the consequences were devastating. Fulbert, enraged by the betrayal and the dishonor brought upon his family, arranged for a group of men to break into Abelard's room and castrate him. Abelard, disgraced, became a monk. Heloise, following his insistence and perhaps her own spiritual calling, reluctantly became a nun. Years later, their famous correspondence began. Abelard, now an abbot and still a celebrated but controversial thinker, wrote his autobiography, the Historia Calamitatum, Story of My Misfortunes, a deeply personal account of his suffering. A copy of this work reached Heloise, who had risen to become a highly respected abbess of the Paraclete Abbey, a community of nuns originally founded by Abelard. Her reading of his narrative, which described his suffering but often omitted hers, spurred her to write to him. Her first letter is a profound and poignant declaration of her enduring love, her intellectual brilliance, and her struggle with her forced spiritual vows. She expressed her longing for him, her resentment at the circumstances that tore them apart, and her grappling with the conflict between her earthly love and her spiritual devotion. Abelard's replies, while offering spiritual guidance, often seemed distant and focused on theological matters rather than the emotional depth of her appeals. This exchange of letters, filled with a complex blend of passion, sorrow, intellect, and spiritual contemplation, became a cornerstone of medieval literature and a timeless testament to a tragic love. The immediate ripple effect of their correspondence was the deepening of their intellectual and spiritual connection, even while they remained physically separate. Heloise, through her letters, challenged Abelard's spiritual complacency and his often self-pitying narrative. She pushed him to consider the profound implications of their past, not just for his own salvation, but for her own. Her profound intelligence and passionate devotion re-engaged him, leading to further theological discussions and spiritual guidance for her and her monastic community. The letters, widely copied and circulated, became models of Latin prose, influencing medieval literature and rhetoric, cruding the power of personal narrative and intellectual debate. The unfolding consequences of this unique correspondence were far-reaching, extending beyond their personal tragedy. Their letters became a powerful exploration of themes like love, suffering, sin, redemption, and the conflict between the sacred and the profane. They offered a unique window into the intellectual and emotional lives of two brilliant individuals grappling with societal constraints and personal desires. Heloise's leadership at the Paraclete Abbey, guided by Abelard's original charter and their shared intellectual and spiritual vision, established a highly regarded monastic community for women. This community became a model of learned and devout female monasticism, fostering education and spiritual discipline. The enduring popularity of their letters cemented their place in history as one of the most compelling and tragic love stories, inspiring countless later writers, poets, and artists to explore the complexities of human relationships and the pursuit of knowledge. Their correspondence fundamentally shaped the understanding of love, intellect, and suffering in the medieval world, proving that even in the face of profound personal ruin, the power of words exchanged between two devoted souls could resonate through centuries.